Hi, I'm Eric Taylor. I work at Multnomah County Environmental Health. I've been doing inspections for 11 years now. This is the like third state I've worked in. I worked in Arizona, I've worked in Utah, and now I'm up in Oregon. Um, I was on the temporary team for a little while, so I'm filling in for Sombra. So at the end of the presentation, there's Sombra's contact information. If you have questions after this, Sombra is the best person to contact, so her contact info is there. But yeah, we're just gonna kind of go over temporary event stuff, and I don't know. You guys can ask as many questions as you want. I mostly plan on trying to answer questions for people. Is really what I want to get or do for this presentation. So
Thank you. Would you like to, are you running your own presentation, correct?
yeah, I can do that.
Mhm.
Okay. I guess we'll jump in then. Let's see. Okay. So yeah, this is going to be on the temporary event program. Um, okay, so kind of basically what we do is the main thing we want to ensure that we are the food vendors at temporary events are handling their food in a safe way for the public. And what we do is we inspect food that's for immediate consumption. Unlike food that's been packaged and is not for immediate consumption, that generally falls under the Oregon Department of Agriculture for that inspection. But if it's food people are making on site and serving, that's what we inspect. And we try to be as educational with our inspections as we can. So that's what we want to do is educate you and your staff for safe food handling practices. We want to be more educational rather than regulatory because we would, we're not there the whole time. You probably will do another booth in the future. And if we spend time educating you, it's just better for everybody so that food's safer and it's easier the next go around for you. And it's easier for us when we do the inspection next. Okay, so we have three main types of licenses. They all cost the same because you basically are paying for an inspector to come out and inspect the site. So a single event license, this is for like a one-time thing, like the example on their Cinco de Mayo. So this is like an event that doesn't last more than 14 days and is like kind of a one-time thing. It's there and then it's gone, right? And then we have an intermittent 30-day license. This is for like for example, like something happening at the expo center, or a lot of these happen at the Portland International the raceway. It's like there's a lot of different events that happen there, but it's in the same space. So we'll let you get an intermittent 30-day license. So if there's going to be multiple festivals or events but they're run by different groups of people, you can, but you're going to be in the same venue. You can have one license for a 30-day period. And then the last one we have is a seasonal 90-day license. This is like really mostly like farmers markets is what get these, where it's like it's the same people hosting the event. It's in the same location. You can get a 90-day license for that. And then we don't just do temporary events. We do other licenses. So any restaurants, catering operations, a bed and breakfast, and then food carts. And then I also want to mention while we're here about food.
I believe he's frozen. We'll just give it a little sec to see if we can reload.
In Oregon, a lot of food trucks and food carts, they kind of park in one place and don't move around, but we license you to be able to move your cart around. So if you have a food cart license and you can move it and take it to the farmer's market, you've already got a food license, you're allowed to do that. So you wouldn't need to get a temporary event license if you're already there. There are some kind of exceptions to that. If it's an out of county license and it stays longer, stays overnight, we'll have you get like a $25 cart license fee. But if it's a Multnomah County food cart and you bring it to an event, you don't need a separate license. So, okay. So kind of what you want to expect during your health inspection. So, we try to get to you before the event starts. We do this for a bunch of reasons. One, it's easier for us to do your inspection when you're not trying to be serving and feeding people. It's kind of hard if you've got a big line of customers and we're trying to ask you questions about how stuff was prepared, how it was stored, and all of that. If you're trying to serve your customers as well, so we try and get there early. Another main reason we want to do this is if there are issues that we need corrected for some reason or another, we can correct those issues before you've served food to people. But this also, it doesn't always happen that we get there before you start. It kind of depends on how busy we are and how many people we have working. Most of these events happen on the weekends, and so we don't have our full staff working on the weekend. So if it's a really busy weekend, we may not get you till the middle of your event, but we try and get there before the event starts. Something else to note with this too, when you're filling out your applications for your temporary event license, we have there's a spot on there to put when your booth is going to be set up. So when you're filling that out, give us like the time you plan on being set up and ready to start serving people, not the time you plan on getting there. So if you say I'm going to get there at 8, because that's how we plan to show up. So if you say 8 o'clock and we show up at 8 o'clock and you're like, oh no, I planned on getting there at 8, then it kind of throws everything off. So put the date, the time you plan on being ready for an inspection there. Okay, so next thing we do, we're going to go through and look and make sure your booth has everything you need for your inspection. There's kind of a list of stuff we'll go over on the next slide about what that means and what all you will need to pass that inspection. And then the last thing is after you go through the inspection and you pass, we're going to give you a pink sticker. That's a big license. It's your license. You want to put that somewhere where the public can see that you are a licensed booth. Okay.
And
So,
Eric, I'm so sorry, before you go on to the next slide, the previous slide that you just presented on,
uh,
not the one that you just finished, but the one before, your camera solidly froze for a good portion of that slide.
this slide that I'm on now,
Yes, that's the one. And I wondered if you wouldn't mind just repeating what was said. We have folks messaging asking what was said for this slide, please.
okay. Okay, so this is just the different types of licenses we have besides temporary event licenses. So like we have restaurant licenses, we've got catering licenses, bed and breakfasts, and then food carts. The main thing I wanted to say about this one is if you have a food cart license for Multnomah County and you're doing an event, um, like a farmer's market, for example, and you can move your mobile cart to the event, you don't need to get a temporary event license. You can take your cart and serve food out of there. That's what they're licensed to do, is move around. I know a lot of most carts, they park in a pod and they don't move. And if that's the case for your particular food cart, that's fine. But some of them you can drive around. Just, if you can drive it around and move it to an event, you can use that license there. If it is a out of county food truck, you also won't need a license unless you stay overnight, and then it's like a $25 fee. So, and then if you have more specific food cart questions, when I'm all done with the presentation, I'm more than happy to answer those because I know that one, a lot of people ask a lot of stuff about that one. So,
Thanks so
okay.
much. Appreciate you doing that.
Yep. Okay. So, all right, jumping back here. What the inspector looks for at your food booth. Okay, so one of the big things that you're gonna need is a hand washing station. what a typical hand washing station looks like is you've got soap, paper towels. You're gonna need at least 5 gallons of water, and you need a free flowing valve. And what that means is a valve that you can open and all the water will drain out. That way you can open the valve, scrub and lather your hands, and then close the valve so you can get a good hand wash. I've seen a lot of people try to do like the drink dispensers where you push the button with your thumb. You can't really wash your hands like this. You need to be able to wash them this way. Most people get those like beverage containers that are a 5 gallon bucket at like Restaurant Depot or the chef's store that you can has a little valve you can flip open. So that's the big one. Usually people will show up with something and the valve doesn't hold open, and then we gotta make you stop until you can get the right kind of valve on that. Um, okay, food handlers cards. You'll need an Oregon food handler card. You need at least one Oregon food handler card in the booth. That the person with the food handler card needs to be in the booth the whole time. So it's usually a good idea to have more than one. That way, if you need to leave for some reason, you don't have to stop your food operation. You can keep going. All food from an approved source. So what we mean by that, nothing that you made in your house. Um, the food needs to, like if you're buying meat, it's got to come from an inspected source. So something that's got a USDA stamp on it or something like that. Pretty much if you get your food from like the grocery store or you get it from like the chef supply store, it's going to be approved source. But the big one with that is not being prepared in your home. The other one with that is if you have a food truck, you can't prepare food on the food truck and then take it to a temporary event. So you can't use your food truck as a commissary. Okay, and then the next thing, proper hot and cold holding for your food storage. So we're going to look at like your menu, what you're preparing, and if you've got capacity to hold all of your food hot and cold. So we may come in at the beginning of your inspection, and if you had a bunch of food that you just brought from your commissary and you put it in the cooler, but you packed the cooler so full you couldn't put any ice in there, it might be at 41, but we can kind of tell like, well, it's a hot summer day and you put no ice in here. This is going to be out of temperature soon, so we're going to make you go get more ice. So, with cold holding, lots and lots of ice. Hot holding's a little easier to do. Usually you have like propane stove or something like that. Sterno, those little Sterno cans, they don't work super well. So if you're starting up and looking into like equipment to buy, I would look for other hot holding options besides Sterno. It doesn't work great. You'll need a thermometer. You're going to need a thin tip thermometer. It's going to be a probe, right? That you can stick into food. Something like this. So metal end, and then it necks down. That's the thin tip. So this will read temperatures quickly. So something you can put inside the food. Digital thermometers are a lot better than those dial thermometers. Dial thermometers, they have to be calibrated every time you use them, and that's very hard to do, especially when you're at a temporary event. You don't have a lot of extra ice water to be calibrating it regularly. So get you a good digital thermometer. They're not too expensive. You're going to need some kind of sanitizer and a kit to check the concentration of that sanitizer. So the most common sanitizer, a lot of people just get bleach. The active ingredient in bleach that we're looking for is chlorine level. And you'll just want those little test papers that you can dip in there and check what concentration it's at. The other most common one is quaternary ammonia. That'll also have a test strip. If you want to use a different sanitizer for some reason, you can call us, ask us if it's okay. I would ask before you get to the event, like well ahead of time. It's kind of hard to fix it because if you bring something that isn't an allowed sanitizer and you don't have a way to like sanitize your workstations or dishes or anything like that, we're going to make you close until you can get something. So if you have questions about something about a sanitizer, ask earlier rather than at the inspection. You're gonna have to have a way to wash, rinse, and sanitize your dishes. and all of your cooking utensils. Some places will, if you've got a commissary, another restaurant you can work out of, they'll wash a lot of extra dishes, like extra spatulas and tongs and things, and keep them in a container that won't get contaminated. And then they'll take everything back to their commissary and wash, rinse, and sanitize at the end of the night. That's okay. If you can't do that, you're going to need to bring some way to do that, to do the wash, rinse, and sanitize step. The easiest way is to have 3 buckets, one with soapy water, one with clean water, and one with sanitizer. And then let's see, dry food storage. So mainly what we're looking for with dried food storage is like you can't put your food in the dirt on the ground, right? Like you got to have it up off the ground a little bit because we don't want you putting food in the dirt. We really, what we're looking for is we want you to have some way of preventing your food from getting contaminated from the ground. So if you've got them in like big containers or buckets or something like that, that's also okay, or something to keep it lifted up off the ground, that will also work. Raw protein storage. So we don't want your raw meats cross-contaminating your other like raw produce or different types of meats, right? Like chicken has a higher cooking temperature of 165 than like your cut like beef cuts, that's 145. So those need to be separated somehow. The easiest way to do it is to just have separate coolers, right? So you'll have like a beef cooler and a chicken cooler, or you got to have something to keep them completely separated from each other, maybe containers inside the like Tupperware sealed containers in your cooler. That works too. Then we're also probably going to ask you how you transported your food. You know, if you're putting it like we went to the chef store and we put it all in the cooler and then we drove it here, that's going to be okay. We just want to make sure that the food isn't getting contaminated during transportation. Or if you made that food in a commissary and you're keeping it hot, we were going to want to know how you kept it hot while it was being transported, right? Did you put it in a hot box, an insulated container of some kind? How are you maintaining the temperature or keeping the temperature hot while you drive your food? This is also important if you're driving your food a long ways and it's being cold hauled. If you're driving within the Portland area, it's not as big of a concern. But if you're bringing it further away, then we're going to ask like how you or how you transported it so that you could prevent it from being contaminated and that you could keep your foods either cold or hot, depending on what you were going for with that. Advanced cooling of food at a commissary. Oh, so you can't cool food at an event. It's got to either be hot or cold when it comes to the event. And then if you're going to reheat it and keep it hot, it's got to be reheated and stay hot. It's just cooling's one of the harder things to do in a restaurant, and at a temporary event, there's just kind of too much going on. You have a lot less equipment. You don't have as much refrigerator space, sometimes no refrigerator space. So it's just a lot harder to cool. So we just don't let people cool stuff. And then lastly, personal hygiene and employee health policy. So this mostly means we're wanting to make sure people are washing their hands. They aren't contaminating food with their hands or clothing. And then also, no employees are working sick. With that, the things we're looking for with employee illnesses and being sick is we don't want anybody that's got vomiting, diarrhea, fever and a sore throat, jaundice, or any infected pussing cuts on your hands or wrists. Those are the 5 things we're looking for with employee illness and personal hygiene.
Eric, I had a question about the food from an approved source.
Uh-huh.
Let's say someone has a bay tree in their backyard and they want to use fresh bay to help, marinate something they're preparing at a temporary event. How do you confirm that all the ingredients they're using are from an approved source? Is it just a question? Are you looking for receipts? How do you kind of regulate that?
Oh man, it depends on a lot of stuff. So like bay making sure bay's like is it like a herb or what is that exactly?
Yeah, so it's a bay leaf
Bay
that's
leaf? Okay.
typically right? So it would be considered like a fresh herb.
Yeah, okay, so fresh herbs and, like, raw produce, there isn't really approved or unapproved source on that, right? Like, if you had tomatoes from your garden, you can bring those, right? Now, the reason you can bring, like, your own home is you're supposed to kinda rinse them off, um, and then, similar with, like, the bay leaves and stuff, what we're gonna look for in those, like, if I pull out your bay leaves and they're covered in dirt and they look like they've been, like, stomped on and stuff, I'm gonna probably ask you, like, "What happened to these?" Right? But, like, you could do something like that. Like, you could have fresh herbs and, like, produce is okay to, like there isn't like, it can kinda come from anywhere, I guess, for an approved source.
Got it. Okay, I
The
appreciate you answering that question.
Yeah, the
I
thing
did
from home is mostly you can't do, like, advanced prep, right? Like, I don't wanna, like, come to the event and then find out, like, "Oh, yeah, all of this chili, I made it in my house." Like, that is what I'm getting at with that, right? But same
right.
with, like, meat products, if you're getting meat, that's gotta come from a butcher shop or somewhere where it was, like, the animal went through an inspection process before it was slaughtered and processed.
Yeah. I'm receiving some questions in chat here from Mauricio. He's asking, what's the reason for the food cart not being used as a place for prep of food for catering or serving at another location? How you mentioned that it can't be a commissary, and I think it's the same reason why you can't prepare things at home, right?
No, it's a different reason.
Oh, okay.
So here the difference is, um, a food truck, they have less capacity for making food, right? Like, it's a smaller space, right? And this was kinda something that when the rule was being written, this is sort of like where they decided this drew this line was, the cart doesn't have capacity to make enough food to handle the normal cart operation and then an extra amount for an event, right? Because like, if you're doing a lot of extra prep and you just like, the food cart doesn't really have space for you to put all of that extra food if you're, like, making and cooling a lot of food and maintain operating the normal cart, right? Like, the cart when we approve a cart, we kind of it's approved for, like, this is, like, just for this space. It doesn't have enough coolers, it doesn't have enough storage space, it doesn't have enough, like, burners for, like, cooking all of that stuff, so it's just not allowed to be used as a commissary for a temporary event. And it's the same reason for catering, it's just the cart is just basically like your normal car operation. Like, if it's in a pod, it's kind of only got capacity to safely make food for what's going out the window during the day operation there. Does that make sense? Did that answer their question?
It sounds like it's an issue with space and regulating temperature.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and a
Yeah, go
lot of
ahead.
that is, like, limited fridge space, right? Like a lot of times a restaurant will have a walk-in, sometimes a couple walk-ins, or space for lots of reach-in fridges. A food cart, a lot of times you've got room for one fridge, right? And maybe two. And that's just not enough space that's barely enough space for the cart's regular operation. It's just not any extra capacity for an event or big catering operation. So that's why it's not allowed.
Got it. Thank you. Mauricio, I hope that answers your question. We also have a question from Lizette asking about what about an approved cottage food item? Can we sell those at farmers markets?
Oh man, that's a mess. That's not for me. That's, I think, an ODA question.
Okay.
I don't know all of the cottage food rules. I I think, the ODA inspector may have a better answer for that. I don't know all of the rules for them being at a farmer's market.
That's great. We have them presenting right after you, so we can always pose the question to them. Mauricio follows up with everything that you shared about the food cart and using it for prep and the such. Can a food cart be licensed as a commissary only?
Um, the food cart can't get a co it, we we have a different type of license that's like a commissary where like it's like the whole thing is making food for other places to be served, and we don't license food trucks for that.
Okay.
It's food trucks are kind of their own, or food carts are kind of their own special thing. It just I can see why you're asking the question, and it's like, well, if it's only this food cart is only for me to make food, now I'm not made a capacity issue. It's like that, you know, you got a pretty good argument about like you're not causing an issue, but like because it's it's also written in the food truck or the food cart licensing rules that that's not allowed. So like if you came to us with a plan review and you told us like this is the plan with it, we would tell you no because of our licensing rules.
I just saw another question in the chat, whether someone can store sausages and vegetables in the same refrigerator.
In the same refrigerator? Is there more specific, like if they're I've seen this at events where someone will bring a prep top cooler, and if you can put them so that like, because in a restaurant, right, we want food stored according to cooking temperature. So if you have the produce here on this top shelf and then you've got your sausage down here, that would be totally fine. The reason we're a little pickier about a cooler with that is everything's kind of sitting in the ice, and in order for the food to stay cold, that ice needs to be packed all the way around the food, and then the ice starts melting, and now we've got like the sausage juice migrating up into the produce, even if you stuck them on top of each other in the cooler. So if it's in a fridge, that would be okay. Did that answer what they wanted?
I believe so. So basically, depending on what's layered on top of what, right? Like meat's under.
Yes.
They just can't
Or
be
fridges,
touching.
right?
Yeah,
But if
any
it's a
liquid.
cooler with ice, different, right? Because of the water melting and stuff.
Someone else is asking in the chat, so food carts can function as a prep space if they are prepping for a food cart operation, but cannot function as a prep space for serving at a space outside of the cart. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Cool. Can the food cart be equipped with a regular fridge, or does it have to be commercial?
They can have a like home fridge, yeah. There's a few other caveats with that. If you want to cool with that home fridge, there's like extra paperwork you need to fill out. Like you need to have a cooling log to make sure that food is cooling properly. But if it's like you're just storing food in there, it'll work. My experience is like the issue with a home fridge is they aren't meant to be opened and closed a lot. So if you're using it as like your prep fridge and you're opening and closing the door, it's gonna like break, and they're harder to repair if you can repair them. So that's something to think about if you're buying like what are you gonna do with this fridge if you're gonna start a food.
The food cart I just rented comes with a regular.
It is allowed. You could have one, but yeah, if it's already in there, I would kind of think about what food you're putting in there and try to keep the stuff you're going to be grabbing a lot not in that fridge so that you're not opening the door a lot.
Gotcha.
And then if you're going to cool stuff, you would want a commercial fridge for cooling. But if you don't have any commercial fridges in there, there's some extra paperwork to do like a cooling log to make sure your food's cooling from the 135 to 70 in 2 hours, and then from 70 to 41 in 4 more hours.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
There's another question about sea moss juice in the chat. They say they sell it at farmers market, but it does not fall under the cottage food license. So she's wondering what license she should get to be able to sell that at the farmers.
Sea moss juice? So it's like sea moss that's been juiced? I guess I've not heard about I've not run into that yet.
Yeah,
Um,
it's basically just like apple juice mixed with sea moss.
okay. That might be a good one to ask Sombra later, is what I'm thinking. But
Okay.
it also, you could, so just in general, the sea moss is going to be another thing we're going to want to make sure that came from, well, I haven't run into sea moss yet, so I'm not going to say anything about approved source or not approved source because I haven't dug into it. It might be considered
Understood.
like it's produce, it might not. I'm not totally sure. It would also, like, I guess if it was like fresh sea moss, I don't know, or if it's like a powdered substance that you're getting from someone else and it's coming in like a container, we're going to want to look into where that's coming from. But let's, for this discussion, say like the sea moss is like, it's a powder that you're going to mix into some other juice. The juice would need to come from an approved source. The powder comes from an approved source. And if you're mixing it at the event for people to take and drink, then you could get a temporary event license from us for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
But that one probably I would give Sombra a call or an email because I'm guessing it's maybe not quite the situation I just made up. It might be a little different.
And we will be her information will be at the end of these slides, I believe.
Sorry,
Yes, the contact info is on the end of the slide.
I thought of another question, but is it the right moment, or should we just like do the presentation
This-
ask at the end?
I only have like a handful more slides, but this is the bulk of what I wanted to talk about. And if this is what you guys want to ask, like we can just keep going asking questions until we run out of time, and then that would be totally fine with me. Like my whole goal is I want to make sure when you guys go do a temporary event, it goes pretty smooth, or at least you have a solid footing to start filling out the application. Then you can ask some questions to Sombra or our front office staff to get your application set up. That's kind of what I think we want to get out of this. So
Carlos is asking in the chat, what type of license a brick and mortar coffee shop will fall under?
that'd just be our regular license. So we have like we just have a generic restaurant license, and then the fee changes based on the number of seats you have. I don't remember all the seating off the top of my head, but like it's just a normal restaurant license from us. If it was previously a food establishment that serves similar food, like if you're buying a coffee shop that was a coffee shop, you just want to do a change of ownership. If it's a brand new construction or it was not really a coffee shop, like something like I don't know, something completely different beforehand, you may need to do a full plan review, which is you'll send in drawings of like where your sinks are going to be located and all your equipment and everything. But it just would be our one restaurant license.
Let me just ask the question really quick. So I had a client that wanted to do like frozen popsicles at farmers market, and we were wondering, is that a packaged product or is it a ready to eat food? So we didn't know like who to ask for a license.
Okay, what's in the popsicles?
Let's say it's like some are with like water and fruit and sugar, and some are with like milk and like like bananas and like sugar. Like they just frozen into a stick and then like they sell it.
Okay, so if they're commercially packaged, there's like a handful of exemptions. And like the reason I'm asking about the popsicles is because like it might fall under there's an exemption for like commercially packaged ice creams, and depending on like the dairy and stuff, it might fall under that one. So it's possible it could be exempt from licensing, but it's got to be commercially packaged, and that typically means it usually means like Oregon Department of Agriculture is inspecting the place that's packaging it, or like FDA is if it's being sold across state lines and stuff. But that one, it also, so the dairy in it would make it potentially hazardous, so it would need to be kept cold. So if it doesn't fall under being a commercially packaged product, then you would need to get a temporary event license from us.
We have a
Okay.
few more questions in the chat. One is, what is commercial packaging?
Oh, that's
Fun.
it gets complicated, right? And like it's kind of people above me that determine whether or not things count as commercially packaged or not. So if you it's typically if it's like been made in a like if it's being made and whole sold, that's generally when we would consider it commercially packaged. And it's like a tight package with like sealed at both ends, not just like it's like a to-go container or like those cups with like a lid put on the top. It's usually like this has a bag and the bag was sealed on both ends type of thing,
Look.
or it's sealed on one end. And it's usually like that's being inspected. I don't know, it can get messy. So it's kind of hard to answer generically. And usually with commercial packaging and whether or not something counts as commercial packaged, we kind of do that on a case by case basis. So that one might be better if you have a product and you've got it and you're wondering if it's commercially packaged, that might be better to ask specifically, like, here's where it's being made, here's how it's being like sealed up, here's how it's stored, here's the facility it's been made in. That's usually stuff we want to
We also have another question that's what license would a vending machine require, if any?
It depends on what is in the vending machine. If it's chips and candy, we don't really care, it's fine, right? If it's got potentially hazardous foods like dairy, sandwiches, and stuff like that, you would typically get a we have a different vending license, and someone would come look at your I believe it's 10% of your vending locations to make sure those vending machines are holding food properly, and that you've got certain controls on those for like if the power goes out, are you getting alerted? Like the power went out and the machine locks itself so that people can't buy food that's been out of temperature for too long. But if it's non-potentially hazardous food, you don't need a license for that.
Okay. Javier is also asking, would following the 135 Fahrenheit to 70 Fahrenheit within the 2-hour procedure and then storing it in the fridge be allowed so the license gets approved? Or, of course, following the cooling logs and everything?
Was this from the same person with the home fridge?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that was something you would work with your regular inspector with. So they would be asking you about those cooling logs and making sure you're filling them out. That's that would be okay. That's something your inspector would work with you with. When you're what's being cooled, if it's like a thick product like beans, you also want to make sure you're putting those in as thin a space as you can. Like a thin, shallow metal pan is best. So you have more surface area, metal, so that the heat's conducted out. That will also help. But if you're doing those logs, that would be allowed, and that's something you'd work with your routine inspector about. And if you just purchased this and you're going through a change of ownership, you're going to have one of our it's probably going to be Jamie or Jill will come chat with you to do your approval, and they can help you getting those cooling logs, and then like going over more specifics with your product, and like give you some good suggestions on like, oh, well, this type of product, it's a little easier to cool this way, that kind of a thing. But it would be allowed.
Okay. We also have the question, what's the rule for offering seating outside of the food cart?
That one, if you start putting seats in, depending on the city you're in, they start caring about if you have bathrooms available for the people sitting there or not. It starts being a city thing. So some of our inspectors will like say things to you about it just so that you don't get blindsided by the city coming by. But that's what, if you start having seats outside, then the city wants to make sure you have a bathroom for your customers.
I see. And then there's also another one. How do you go about being a food vendor at a fair and have inspections done prior to the fair or slash event?
So
Prior to going to the event, I'm assuming. Asaura, did you mean prior to the event starting itself or prior to setting up at the event?
Prior to the event altogether. So how much far in advance do you need to have all of these approvals done before, let's say, being at the Cinco de Mayo fair or any other fair?
So what we want, you want to turn your application in as soon as you can, and then pay your license fee. If you turn it in the day before and pay your license fee the day before, we charge you $100 late fee because we try to plan out ahead of time how many people we need for different events. And if we get flooded with them at last minute, then we sometimes have to pay people overtime and it's extra work and all that for us to get enough people out to the event. Um, so turn your application in as soon as you can and make sure it's at least 2 days before the event, but really try and get it at least a week before. That way also, if we notice something on your application that like is something that maybe needs corrected, we can call and like get that sorted out well before the event. As far as inspecting prior to the event, we really like we don't go the day before and do the inspection. Like we'll go like prior to it starting. So if the event starts at like 11 and we get told on your application, you said I'll be set up by 10 because some events require you to be set up an hour beforehand, then we would try and get there as close to 10 as we can. But again, it depends on staffing and what else is happening that day, that sort of thing. But we wouldn't show up like the day before and do that inspection.
Isara also asked, where can you submit this? One of the other things I do gotta say, Isara, is if you are planning on being part of the program and kind of, joining us, these are questions that you can work along your advisor to kind of figure out, all of these links, and all of this information. So I highly suggest joining Camino Mi Negocio so that you can see about joining.
And just to answer really quickly, like if you go on their website, like you'll see all of the explanations for everything and you follow through the links. That's really how we do it once you join the program. But yeah, if you want to just go ahead and do that, like you can do it.
Let's see. Jose is asking, hi, is there a checklist for basic equipment for a food truck or does it depend on the kind of menu?
It depends on the menu. So we have some stuff online about like what's required. So like minimum, I think you need a 35-gallon freshwater tank, and then your wastewater tank needs to be 15% larger. But that changes, right? Like if you have an ice machine and that's going to pull water out, we're going to make you have a bigger wastewater or a bigger freshwater tank, right? Or if you have you have a lot of big pots and so you need a large 3-compartment sink to clean those big pots out, we're going to make you have more than that 35 gallons. So it really is cart dependent. And like when you fill out your application, you tell us your menu, then we'll start drilling into like what you need, because it's really, each cart is like really unique. So it's hard to say like, oh, you need a flat top and you need this and you need one prep top fridge, right? Because it just depends on what you're doing. Some, like if you plan on being in a pod, some pods have like extra warehouse space for you. So like we may not require you to have as much refrigeration, or we may let you have a more expanded menu because you have more storage space at that warehouse. It really depends on the cart and the menu.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Now would be the time to ask. Let's see. Yeah, no, I think that's it for questions. I don't know if you wanna go through another
Okay.
slide or if we just wanna.
I'll keep going on the slides. Maybe we'll get some more questions.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. Common mistakes. Make sure you apply. We talked about this. Apply for your event ahead of time. You know, like I said, at least 2 days, but really 2 days is kind of the minimum. Please try and give us more time than that. If you are buying a new facility, a new food cart beforehand, you want to contact us, apply for your plan review, put in an application. I know sometimes if you like are doing a change of ownership and you're buying the place, like if you buy and then like you wait for the deal to like be totally done, turn in your application as soon as you can with that kind of a thing. And then the last one, this third party one is more kind of like asking like friends and neighbors sort of thing. Ask if you have questions, call us and ask us, right? You can call our front office and let them know, like, I'm opening up a food cart. Can someone talk to me about some things? We're more than happy to talk with you about that stuff. We're try and use this as a resource for getting your questions answered.
Thank you. Also, Juan just posted on the chat a link that you could basically visit to learn more about temporary food events. So
Okay. We basically talked about this
Mhm.
already. Yeah. Please call us, right? Like that a big part of my job, like because I have an inspection area and a big part of my job is being a resource for the people in my inspection area. I really like try to stress to people like, hey, call me if you plan on changing up some menu items, adding a new thing, doing a new process, call me and ask. You know, same for when you're wanting to try and get started, you know. We do really want to help you get your business open and answer your questions ahead of time. Usually it saves you money too, because you know, if you want to do like vacuum packing, for example, and you call us like ahead of time and we tell you, well, you got to have a HACCP plan and you got to have a commercial vacuum packer. Commercial vacuum packers, used ones $4,000. And I go, oh, I don't want to spend $4,000 for something that's going to give me a bunch of paperwork to do. You know, ask us those kind of things beforehand.
Someone is also asking, is it cheaper to get a food license with the city or the county? And also, does she need a city, state, and county license?
Okay. So there, as far as I'm aware, if you're wanting to sell food in Multnomah County, you get a food license from us. There aren't state ones and there aren't city ones. I think it's just county. There might be other licenses that you're required to have, like a business license, that kind of a thing, but as far as like food service goes, it's county.
Okay, so if, say, for example, yeah, okay, gotcha. So if you're from Portland but participating in a Beaverton Farmers Market, you would need to get
Yes, you need
their
to go
license.
to Washington County and get a license from them.
Gotcha. Cool. Any other questions? If not, I think we can just give everyone. Oh yeah, actually, here's the information. For Sombra, as Eric mentioned, Sombra is our usual presenter for this specific topic. She was not able to join, so Eric is covering for her. But this is the person that Eric was suggesting that you reach out to with more specific questions, and who's usually in charge of answering these kind of questions.
Yeah.
We will also send this information out with the email tomorrow, along with the presentation in both Spanish and English, just in case you missed anything. And we will also be sharing the recording once that's available in both English and Spanish. Let's see. Give me a sec.
So if you have a temporary food question, call Sombra's cell phone number or send Sombra an email. If it's a different question, call the main office. There's other individuals like Sombra who like are experts in that area and they can get you their contact information. So like if it's a food truck question, that question needs to go to Jamie, right? But if you have a temporary food one, call Sombra. Different question, call the main office and they'll get you to someone like Sombra to help with that.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. Yeah, honestly, I think we can go ahead and take our break now. I think that's the end of this presentation. We'll give everyone an extra 5 minutes. Is that okay, Melina?
Yeah, I believe Susan is not joining until about 6:20.
Mm-hmm.
at the
Yeah,
earliest. So
I
we
think
can go.
our set time to come back here is 6:25. Does that seem okay?
Yeah, that works.
Great. So we'll take a 15-minute break. I will stop the recording. Started. All right, welcome back, everyone. We will now get into food safety with Susan Kendrick. Susan, if you can please just introduce yourself and maybe just talk a little bit more about your background and then the topic of tonight.
Yeah, my name is Susan Kendrick. Thank you for the invitation tonight. I work for the Oregon Department of Agriculture Food Safety Program. And Melina and Alex, did you just have someone from Oregon Health Authority on? From
We
the
had
county?
from Multnomah County, yes, we had
Okay.
Eric Taylor join tonight.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Okay. So this will kind of be the other side of probably what Eric talked about. We split jurisdiction in the state of Oregon. So we'll talk a little bit about what we cover versus what the county covers. I am located in West Portland, and I am coming up on 27 years with ODA. So been here a long time, and I still enjoy my job. So that's a good thing. So whenever you're ready for the presentation to start, we can get going.
Sounds great. And Susan, I'll be able to track, but certainly feel free to let me know when to
Okay,
go on to the next slide. Happy
perfect,
to just follow your lead here.
perfect. And we can go ahead and go to the second slide since we've done introductions. So I want to start with just giving you a quick overview of who we are at Oregon Department of Agriculture and what we do. We have 5 main program areas, and I work for the Food Safety and Animal Health program area. So our food safety director also oversees animal health, and he oversees lab services, actually. We have an internal services and consumer protection programs area, so kind of our admin area. Market access and certification programs. Some of you might interact with some of these programs. It includes our weights and measures program that calibrates scales. Um, it includes organic certification, produce safety, things like that. Natural resources program covers things like pesticides, plant protection and conservation. They cover like Christmas tree farming and hemp and some of those programs. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So as far as food safety goes, we cover almost everything that you didn't already talk about with Eric. So no restaurants, no food trucks. If it's food for immediate service, it's covered by the county. And then if it's anything else, for the most part, we cover it. We don't do very in-depth inspections at a USDA meat plant, and we defer produce safety primarily to one of our other program areas at food or at ODA, but pretty much we do everything else. And I just want to mention that, and I'll probably say this more than once, please reach out to us if you have questions. We really are here to help you. We'll often spend a lot of time with you up front. We'll talk about that more in just a little bit because we want you to be knowledgeable about the rules, to understand the importance of the rules. I mean, for the most part, they are science-based, and there's a reason for the rules being in place. And we'd like to have all of that information available to you before we start acting like a regulatory agency and, taking enforcement and things like that. We try not to do that. We like to work with you and make sure you understand everything instead of having to go down that road. We have about 6,000 establishments in the state of Oregon that we do visit. And some of those have more than one license with us, like a grocery store. So we have around 11,000 licenses that we inspect. Next slide, please. We have a program director. I mentioned that he oversees food safety, animal health, and lab services. We have 3 managers, and we have 2 people in the office. So if you call our main office, you'll likely speak to either Michelle or Ian. And then the rest of us are field staff, and we have 38 field staff positions. We live and we work all over the state of Oregon. So I have a coworker that's based out of Ontario, one in Hermiston and one in Hood River. There's a couple in Central Oregon, a few in Southern Oregon, 6 people that are all along the coast, and then a couple in Eugene and Corvallis, and then Salem, and the majority of us are in the Portland metro area. So if you're taking this class and you're not in the Portland metro area, you would likely contact one of my coworkers, but they would be a local person for you. 7 of us are specialists. I'll just finish that real quick. 7 of us are
Sorry.
specialists, and that's okay. And we're also inspectors. So I'm the education specialist, and I am also covering manufacturing right now. But we also have someone that specializes in dairy, shellfish, HACCP programs, retail, our automation, so our programs that we use to run our inspection program, and then we have a meat specialist. All right, now I'm ready. So types of inspections that we do, retail groceries. So that means the big grocery store chains like Fred Meyer's, Safeway, Winco, Walmart, all the way down to a small store like Albertsons or I'm sorry, like Plaid Pantry or 7-Eleven, and then everything in between. We cover food processing, which is likely what some of you are interested in. And that could be licensing somebody in their home kitchen, but it could also be one of our businesses along the eastern part of the gorge that processes 1 million pounds of potatoes every day. So it could be very big or very small. We cover the dairy industry. We inspect dairy farms and dairy processing plants. We inspect egg handlers, so somebody that is selling eggs and grading eggs. Drinking water, that means if you're on a private well and you're licensed with us, we also look at your drinking water. We have a meat program. We now have a state meat inspection program as well as our regular retail meat license. So some of our state meat inspection licensees can wholesale their meat products within the state of Oregon. We cover shellfish. So we have 2 boats on the coast. We do water samples. My coworkers did clams. They pull mussels off the rocks. We're doing that for testing purposes to make sure those shellfish products aren't building up toxins and making them unsafe. We test crab for domoic acid, all kinds of things on the coast. We cover seafood and juice products under special HACCP rules. If you're retailing or manufacturing marijuana products that are edibles, we cover that. And then we do various other things like sampling, plan review, and equipment checks. So we do all this under both Oregon laws and rules and federal laws and rules. So as far as Oregon goes, if I'm going to mostly focus on what I think that you might be interested in, if you're a food processor, there's a statute, Oregon Revised Statute 616, and there's a rule that accompanies that, which is 603025. If you're by definition a bakery, so you're making a bread or cake or cookie, there's a statute and regulation associated with bakeries. Domestic kitchens can be food processors or bakeries, and that's a licensed domestic kitchen. There are also exempted domestic kitchens, and I'll mention that in a moment. We have a statute and rule for dairy products, and I mentioned that state meat inspection program. It has its own rule.
Hey, Susan, there's a question in the chat
Okay.
about a coffee roaster and what it would fall under.
Okay. So coffee roasting, it depends. Is it in a home kitchen that you're thinking about or in a commercial facility?
I'm not too sure.
It
It was
would be in
asking
a
in the chat.
commercial facility.
Commercial
about that.
facility, yeah. Then you would need a food processing license, so all the laws and rules I mentioned associated with food processing.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm not looking at the chat, so please just interrupt if you see a question. That's totally fine. So federally, we also, in our Oregon rules, we adopt the federal rules, the federal regulations. So in addition to the rules dictated by Oregon, we're also inspecting any food processor under Title 21 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 117. But I also want to add in a few of the other CFRs that we use because we use one for labeling. If you're making a dietary supplement, it has its own rules. And then there's some things that have a standard of identity, like a jam, jelly, or preserve. So they have some extra rules. Juice, seafood. There's various rules. There's, I think, close to 1,000 parts to that 21 CFR, and we do adopt most of them, but primarily when we come into a facility, we're using 117. That's what our inspection program primarily addresses, along with 101, which is the labeling. Federally, you'll also see the USDA come into a wholesale meat facility if they're not operating under the state meat inspection program. And for instance, if they're wanting to wholesale across state lines, they do have to be under USDA. And then for our dairy processing plants, in addition to our Oregon rules, we also use the federal pasteurized milk ordinance.
Someone also asked in the chat if you work with people under the cottage law.
Yeah, and that might be the next slide. Or maybe I'm one away. Can I come back to that in just a
Yeah.
moment?
I would say so, yeah.
Okay. I want to mention that I know a lot of people get information from the website, and if you've been on our website pre-December 9th, I think it was, it looked different. We went to a new version of SharePoint for our website, and this is what it looks like when you go to food safety homepage. It used to look very different than this. And you'll see that in the upper left section, you can select food safety licenses. The domestic kitchen and the what I can do without a license, those are also accessible through the food safety licensing selection. But they get so much interest from the public that they've broken those apart so that you can get to them directly, along with our shellfish. A lot of people look up the shellfish program because it tells you if the beaches are open for recreational shellfish harvest. And I have one more slide that's with the website that's up next here. So when you select the licensing, you can see in this screenshot down the left side, the navigation bars give you all of our different license types. So in this photo, I've selected food processing, and you'll see that it defines food processing and warehousing, and then it gives resources associated with that type of licenses, with those types of licenses. When you first go to this selection, it comes up as the Get a License application to get you started, but all of these license types have further information, and they're all available on our website. Also, under that Get a License application selection, you can find your local inspector. There's a link to a location where if you plug in your zip code, it will bring up contact information for whoever's covering that area. All right, next slide, I think, is about exemptions. Yes. So we, I think in the last 2 legislative sessions, we've had bills go through that have required us to adjust and write some new rule language for 2 different types of exemptions. Last April, we updated our residential kitchen exemption, and it's now called the cottage food exemption. So we We'll usually defer you to the exemption information on our website if you're wanting to make something under the exemption. But if you're exempt from licensing, then we don't come and visit you and we don't regulate you. The only reason we would come to see you is if we had a complaint. So you're not exempt from following the rules that are outlined under the exemption, but you are exempt from being licensed. And then farm direct exemption, that was updated in November 2023, so just a little over a year ago. Farm direct has to do with you growing all or part of, or most of usually, your ingredients, like you're wanting to make salsa from fresh.
I believe Susan is frozen. We'll give her a second.
Let me see if I can message her in the chat.
Also, if you do have any questions as you think about them, feel free to just put them in the chat and we'll get to ask when we get an opportunity. Hi, Susan, you're back.
I'm back. Sorry, it took me a minute to find the connection again. I tried to close those down so I wouldn't be draining too much.
No worries, no worries.
All right. Did I answer the question about the exemption before I went away?
Yeah, I believe you were you were speaking. Juan.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And I want to circle back to the coffee question. If you are interested in making your coffee on a very small scale, like roasting your coffee and packaging it, you can now do that under the cottage food exemption, but you do have some restrictions on how much you can sell, who you can sell it to, and then you have to note some things on your labeling about not being in a licensed kitchen. So if you're wanting to test out the market, take a look at that cottage food exemption because you can now roast coffee under that.
I think
All
we
right.
did have another question about cottage, the cottage food exemption in
Okay.
our last presentation. Lizette, do you want to ask your question here?
It was about selling at the farmer's market with a cottage food item.
Yeah, I mean, most of the restriction is around you selling direct to the final consumer. There are some allowances for you actually selling to like a retail store, but they have to separate it. And I haven't really seen that in practice. But yes, as long as you're making something that falls under that exemption and you're selling direct to the final consumer, that's a possibility.
So things like the hand washing station, does that have to also happen if I'm selling at the farmer's market?
You need a hand washing station if you're handling the food at the market. So if you're sampling, for instance, then you would want to have a hand washing station.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I should say too that when we put that new rule language into place in 2024, for the first time since we've had domestic kitchen licenses, which I believe started in the 60s or 70s, we've allowed people to process in their home kitchen for many, many years. But for the first time, you can actually have a pet in your home and still either process in your kitchen as a licensed facility or under the exemption, as long as you declare on your label the species of pet. So you have to say you have a dog or cat. So that's something a little different that had never been allowed in the past.
Awesome. There's also a few other questions in the chat.
Okay.
One says, it seems that selling spices could be considered a cottage food in Oregon, not requiring license if under 50K annual sales. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a nice handout. It's called Oregon's Cottage Food Exemption on our website. And specifically, it says dried tea, spice, or seasoning blends from commercial food. That's something you can do.
Mm.
Yeah, so you have to, it doesn't necessarily mean you can dry spices yourself, but if you buy it commercially, you can blend it, package it, whatever.
Awesome. And another one is, what if your product has dairy in it? For example, cream cheese.
So the cottage food exemption is for products that don't require temperature control.
Hmm.
Yeah. But you could get a license to do that.
I see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Any more questions, or should we go to the next slide?
You can go on.
Okay. So, I don't have a ton of slides. I want to be open for whatever questions you might have, but I do have a few slides about what you can expect if you contact us, and then go through with getting a license. So typically, you will start the process with us either with an on-site consultation or quite likely a phone consultation. And if it's a retail license, it will also require a plan review. And that's a simple process with us. We have an application. We just need a sketch of the plans and what you plan to make. The fees for that are covered as part of your license fee. There's no extra charge for the plan review. So don't be afraid to get started, because that would be prohibiting you from moving on. But we'll basically discuss with you the facility requirements. So if you're going to be producing in your home kitchen, we'll tell you what you need to have your kitchen set up with. And if you're going to be in a commercial facility, we'll talk about hand washing sinks and dishwashing and that sort of thing. And then we'll probably provide you with some references for the laws and rules and handouts such as our labeling handout, whatever might be applicable for what you're doing. So, the next thing we'll do is we will ask you a lot of questions. So people tend to start out with just, I want to make a variety of things, or I want to make salsa, or I want to make hot sauce. So we'll have lots of follow-up questions to that. Not only what is it you would like to make, but what ingredients will go into your product. And when you're making your product, do you heat it up? Do you have to cool it down? Do you fill it into a jar and while it's hot and then seal it? Are you going to be adding if you're making a hot sauce, are you adding lemon juice to it, or citric acid or vinegar to bring the acidity down? Are you wanting to vacuum pack something, or put it in that jar hot and have a hermetic seal on it? Will it be sold refrigerated, frozen? Is it just, coffee beans? So they're going to be ambient temperature when you sell. And then who are you going to sell to? Because that might depend on whether you can run under the exemption, for instance, or if you need to register with the FDA as a food facility. And then we'll also talk about labels, because we like to be able to see at least your draft of your label, so we can take a look at your ingredient statements most specifically, because we don't want you to miss an allergen and end up in a recall situation. You're not mandated to let us review your labels, but we don't charge for it. And we look at labels all the time, and we want to be able to help you out and keep you out of trouble in the future. So those are some of the questions we'll start by asking you. So once you have gathered everything you need, and we've discussed what you're going to make and how you're going to make it, we are required to do an on-site visit with you. So we call that an initial approval inspection. And when we arrive, we always have our state ID with us. So we'll show our ID to you so you know who we are. We will go over whatever we discussed about the product, about the facility, how you're going to process it. And then once we're both satisfied that all the requirements are met, we bring the application with us and we can either collect the payment by check or money order, or we can leave the application for you to mail in, especially if you want to use a credit card, we'll leave it with you. And you're ready to go at that point. If you do decide to move, I know people that are in shared kitchens will often move from one kitchen to another. Some of our licenses are transferable without paying the fees again, such as that food processing license, but we do need to approve each new location, so we need you to notify us if you're going to relocate. And then, once the process has started and you've got your license, we will conduct routine inspections. If you've been involved, with a business under a county license, the county's mandated, by rule to come in every 6 months because everyone under their jurisdiction is doing food service, so they're actively handling food, and a lot of times it's food that requires refrigeration and that sort of thing. We base our inspections, on risk, our inspection frequency on risk. So if you're a coffee roaster and we don't have any concerns about what you're doing, coffee roasting is pretty low risk because of the temperature that you bring those beans up to. Not a lot's going to grow. And then secondly, that coffee is usually heated again. So we may only come to see you every 2 years or so instead of every 6 months. Whereas if you're making an acidified, um, hermetically sealed hot sauce, we won't let you probably go much more than a year or maybe less than that before we can visit you. So our frequencies will vary, but they are based on risk. So when we come out to do our routine inspection, we will be using Division 25, which is 603025, and we'll be looking at some general items during that routine inspection, but also when we license you initially. And so I just have listed a few of those construction standards that we're always looking for. We want the exterior of the building to be clean and not have standing water and not have a lot of harborage for pests. The interior of the building needs to be cleanable surfaces. The walls and ceiling need to be cleanable, usually light in color, so you can see if things are clean. We really need those doors, whether they're an overhead receiving door or just an exterior person door, to be tight fitting. Again, we want to exclude pests from getting in. The bathroom, it's called a toilet room in the rules, but the bathroom and the hand washing facilities, they need to be conveniently located. You need to have hand sinks that are not only in the bathroom, but you need hand sinks outside in your production area. And of course, you have to have hot and cold running water, soap, single-use towels, need a garbage can, and the bathroom door has to be self-closing. So that's, something that we're looking for during inspection and during that approval. And if you need to pull a plumbing permit to do any work in your facility, we will need to see that you've had your final plumbing inspection before we license you and that it's passed, basically. Next slide. So in addition to those items, I've mentioned that we want you to make sure the doors are tight fitting, and that again is to prevent pests from getting in. But even on the inside, as well as that outside perimeter, we want to make sure that you're not creating a habitat for pests to hide um, and breed and cause you a lot of problems because they are vectors of disease. And then we'll be looking to make sure that the food's always protected against contamination. We want toxic chemicals to be stored away from the food. We want food and packaging to be up off the floor, usually just on a shelf or a pallet is sufficient. All right, next slide. And I want to mention that under our processing rules, there is some minimal training that's required. We can even provide you some handouts and you can read those, and we would consider you reading those and keeping a record of your training. In other words, that you've read those handouts, we would consider that sufficient. Or you can do something like take a food handler's class. We don't specifically require that unless you're operating under the cottage food exemption. But that training should include something to do with personal hygiene, like washing your hands, and then not coming to work when you're sick. And this is all true whether you're um, not the written training part of it, but the symptoms and everything. These are the same symptoms and diseases that you'll find in the food code. So the food code is what we use for grocery stores, but then the county uses that for restaurants too. So we're looking for vomiting, diarrhea, sore throat with fever, and jaundice because it's associated with hepatitis. Next slide, please. And I think that's it. So I'm ready for any more questions you may have.
Thank you, Susan. Let me see. I think I will keep the presentation actually going just because I feel like these questions are very helpful and are worth recording. So if you are gonna ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself if you wish, or type it in the comments, in the chat, and we will be able to read it for you. Does anyone have any other questions? This is a great time to ask Susan.
And Alex, I can just confirm, yeah, when your comment about those spring-loaded hinges will usually cause the door to close by itself, and those are perfectly okay. You don't necessarily have to have that overhead spring or whatever you call it that swings the door closed, but somehow you need the door to close just so that things like flies don't go and land on things in the bathroom and then come out and land on food. So it's just to prevent that vector of disease from occurring.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Anyone else? All right. Okay, let's see. I think someone is asking a question. Oh, so someone is asking, I have a sea moss drink with strawberries and lemon. This can't be cottage food, so what do I do?
Yeah, so I would really recommend starting with contacting your local inspector. And again, you can find that contact information on our website under getting a license application. It's about, it's just before the resources on that page. And they'll talk you through some of those questions that we just covered. For instance, what are all the ingredients? What's your source of the sea moss? How do you make the product? Is it a heating process? We're looking for any pathogens that could survive your process, and how are you going to control that? So is it heat or is it something else? We're looking for the packaging that you plan to use, um, and basically just trying to make sure that it's a safe product. But it would require a food processing license. It's possible it could be done in a domestic kitchen, but it would need to be a licensed domestic kitchen.
Do you ask local inspector at the state office?
Do we have a
Sorry, no, I believe they said we'll get in contact with Letitia to figure this out a little further. Let's see. Also, Letitia, I believe Juan is posting some links there for you to take a look at.
Yeah, so just go into the link and type in your zip code wherever you will be processing. So it'll be your home zip code if you're looking for a home kitchen license, or the zip code of a shared kitchen facility, for instance. And that will tell you who is your contact for food processing and domestic kitchens.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see, does anyone have any other questions? Now's a great time. Otherwise, what do you think, Melina?
Yeah, I think that if there's no more questions, we can maybe wrap up a little bit early this evening. Susan, always a pleasure to listen to you speak and present. There's always little nuances and changes that happen, so it's great to kind of be kept up to date. Actually, I do have one quick question that came up recently amongst our team. Is coconut still considered an allergen? There was, I
That's
think,
a great
an update
question.
to tree nut allergen.
Yes.
And you're going to
Yeah.
solve our riddle.
Yes, it was until about mid-January. It had always been considered a tree nut as far as being an allergen, but it is no longer. The FDA doesn't care if you want to still list it as in a contained statement, but they will no longer be taking action as far as recall if you do not list coconut. The other thing that came out that same week is red dye number 3 is being banned, but there is quite a long phase out period before it has to be off the market, like a couple of years. So,
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. We were a little unclear, so I
yes, that was
appreciate
a
that.
surprise.
Yeah. That's great. Any other final questions? Otherwise, Susan, again, we really appreciate you joining us this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, and my contact information is in the slides if someone comes up with a question later on.
Thank you, Susan. As a
All right.
last plugging, I will also plugging the last day of the series of trainings, which will be in person. Day 3 will be in person at Hacienda CDC, Las Adelitas event space. I will put the links down in the chat. The one that says day 3 in person, that's for the event happening in person on the 25th, so next Tuesday. And the other link that says Camino a mi negocio, that one is to join us for the overview of the program, where you'll be able to listen about the program and kind of the first step to join our program. And it's also an opportunity for us to meet you and present about your idea or business. Aside from that, like I mentioned, we will send all these links via email, as well as the presentations in both Spanish and English, and the recordings of these presentations will also be available sometime in the future in both Spanish and English. And if you do wish to get that link, please connect with either one of us or one of the advisors, or maybe let's connect at Camino a mi negocio. Aside from that, thank you so much. I will end